Hello everyone. Today we are talking about this long thread by Jen Hewitt, and I'm here with Linda from Color Storms Yarn, and I'm Valerie, Knitting Fairy Godmother, and we're in the middle of it, right? I think we've moved into the next interview.
Yes. Beginning chapter 1, she starts with the survey question, how and or why did you learn your craft? And the first person she interviews is Sonya Philip, who wrote the book called 100 Acts of Sewing. So Jen knits and sews. So this first essay and discussion is about sewing. So Jen talks about, the author talks about her sewing origins and then asks Sonya to speak about hers. It's all very interesting. You sew as well, right?
Yeah, I learned how to cut and sew in grade school. So in my house, we always had a sewing machine growing up, and it was a tool that we could use for practical reasons and for creative reasons.
Did the women who taught you tend to create their own patterns, or did they like to buy a pattern and follow it?
So I learned like a lot of the technical details from my aunt, who was a professional tailor, and she obviously had the life experience and the career of being like a professional sewist. Um, and this was always, I default to using a commercially produced pattern, but it's also like the practical parts of, if you're making a pillowcase is just a rectangle folded in half and seamed, right? Or, like,
So some things are easy enough. You don't really need a pattern.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
What about you?
I know my mom, she taught me. I started sewing from about middle school, up through high school. I sewed maybe one thing per year. I never was bitten by the sewing bug, but she always only used a pattern. And so at least she taught me the skill of how to read a pattern. It's
Yes.
fantastic.
Yep.
And later, when I bought a serger and started sewing costumes for my daughter's ice skating adventures and other little girls too, you do finally get the hang of what a sleeve looks like, what the body shapes are, how to do certain basic shapes. And that all helped me a whole lot when I began to get serious about my knitting.
Yeah. As a knitter and crocheter, it's really interesting how the difference between a cut and sew pattern and a knit pattern, and like, for me, the cut and sew patterns are very defined. They have very specific information. But what I love about a cut and sew pattern is that, often it comes with different sleeve choices,
Mm.
lengths, or you could make a bell sleeve or a bubble sleeve, or like, the bodice is the same, and then you change the components that you want. And on top of choosing which fabrics you use, like, you can make any garment and really personalize.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's interesting that both Jen and Sonya Philip really got the sewing bug. They are passionate sewers. And I found it really interesting that she became passionate about sewing once it became an intuitive process,
Mm.
at which she did by just focusing on the dress. So,
Yeah.
they both took like one shape and then did it over and over and over and over again. And I like when Sonya Philip said, there's no shortcut.
No.
You have to put in the time to do it over and over again to gain the manual dexterity and the hand-eye coordination. And so her 100 acts of sewing, it was just something she wanted to do to kind of give her this goal to become proficient. And it almost reminds me of that movie about Julia Child and Julia, was it also Julia, the woman who decided to cook through the whole book of Julia Child?
Julie and Julia
Oh, Julie
is
and
the name
Julia.
of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so she just kind of randomly said, "Oh, how about if I just cook through the whole cookbook and then blog about it?"
Yeah.
Kind of like that, very spontaneous, but it came from a passion to
Yes.
become proficient. And I think that's what makes them special here.
Yeah. I mean, I read the book, I saw the movie, and what I liked about that, watching that experience unfold, is you could watch the improvement in her technique
Mm.
through her results. And I'm sure that she became more confident and faster as she was cooking. The other piece is that if you've ever made a Julia Child recipe and you follow along step by step, exactly what Julia Child says is going to happen will happen with your, if
Oh,
you're
wow.
paying attention. And it just shows a mastery of Julia Child's cooking skills, but also her communication skills. Because her written words, you can follow it. The same things happen if you have all the conditions right. And in that way, it's easy. All you have to
Looks
do is
like you've
read
done
and
it.
follow along. Well, yeah.
Good for you. I haven't done that.
Other cookbooks that or other recipe writers, you know, are just like, well, you cook it, right?
She does a good job of explaining each step and not
Exactly.
assuming that you know how to make that white sauce or you know what this term means. She explains it all really well.
Yeah, and like what to look for in your pan to know that it's time to do the next thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that ability to communicate well, of course, comes up with many knitting patterns and crochet patterns that we follow. Some people are better at others of sort of taking the time to explain each step. I'm working right now on a brioche scarf. It's a
Mm-hmm.
knit along sampler in various brioche stitches. And since I'm talking about her, I should probably pause and go get her pattern and give her credit. She is wonderful at explaining well and having little indents in various pages of explaining what the terms mean and how to do it. So I guess I should go get her pattern.
Okay.
So this is called the Lockdown Brioche School by Robin Weldon.
Hmm.
If you want to try some brioche or improve your brioche skills, I highly recommend looking that one up.
Beautiful.
Jen Hewitt says that she first learned to sew when she was in 5th grade at a summer day camp for girls. Much of what feels so instinctive to me now, winding a bobbin, sewing with the right sides together, back stitching to begin and end a line of stitches, are steps that I learned from my kind, gentle sewing instructor over 30 years ago.
Oh.
So she didn't really start sewing seriously until 2 decades later, she said, but what a nice memory. I have some nice memories about learning to sew too. I took a middle school course And I remember making a skirt and a blouse over the course of the year. And she wasn't a kind and gentle sewing teacher, but I don't have any bad memories of her. She must have been fine. And my mom was a good teacher too. So it's nice to look back on that. And the origins of how you learn something can either propel you into mastery or maybe become a roadblock. Sort of depends on the mix of how it happens and how your brain is.
So Sonya Phillips had this intention to make 100 dresses. And certainly you and I have talked a lot about repetition, breeding mastery, and the act of devotion in practice. And it's interesting to hear those ideas with a cut and sew dress pattern. Because it never occurred to me before. Like, I love the idea of 100 acts, 100 dresses, and making the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, when I finish a sewing project, I don't want to see the sewing machine for 6 months to a year. I don't really like the process. It would never occur to me in a million years. Oh, make the same thing again? No, thank you. But when it comes to knitting, oh yeah, I can never make enough sweaters. I can never get enough of that. For some reason, in me is this passion for the process of knitting opposed to sewing. And it's just fascinating. In this book, you'll find a beautiful mix. So I think that's what's wonderful about this long thread, because it goes to many, many fiber artists, not just knitting, not just crochet, but it embraces many of the others. And I appreciate that I'm going to learn a lot more about the fiber arts as I read this book.
I love that. And that we're all doing the same thing. Our tools are a little bit different, but also there's just enough overlap that I might pick up tips from the cut and sew world that I can either use when I'm on the sewing machine or would be applicable to knit and crochet, because that's what I choose to focus on. And
yes,
it's great. I love it.
And it's just inspiring reading about different women coming from different backgrounds who have persevered in their passion.
I love it. Sometimes I feel like we get very tunnel vision in the knit and crochet world, and this is one way for me to expand my perception and experience.
Absolutely. So we're going to continue with chapter 1 next time. Thank you for joining us, and love to hear your comments about your sewing experience too. Bye-bye.